You awake to the sound of shuffling in your house. A cold sweat drops over you, but you don't see anything as your eyes adjust to the dark. You lay back down after several minutes of not hearing anything else. It must have been the wind. Just as you're about to fall back into a slumber, you hear it again. This time the noise is louder. You rise and see that your door is ajar. Once again, your eyes try to adjust, and there it is. Sitting at the edge of your bed is someone or something. It has gray skin and it appears to be very thin and frail. It has two massive clawed hands. Its face is unreadable like a mask. Two completely black eyes stare back at you. Before you react, the creature is gone. It leaves your room on all fours, and you once again are left alone in the dark. Or at least you hope you're alone. It doesn't matter. Now you're too afraid to lay back down and close your eyes. In the world of internet horror, there are a few stories that truly reach the stage of being called an internet urban legend. The few that do reach this level are remembered mostly for the impact they had on the internet as a collective. The creatures in these stories can be called the cryptids of the internet era, but it goes deeper than that. One of the most terrifying internet cryptids is one that most of you probably already are pretty familiar with. This creature has caused countless nightmares and it has burned itself deeply into the subconscious of internet horror. That creature is called the Rake. Now, this may sound like a blast from the past for a lot of you. The Rake hasn't really permeated in the modern internet horror collective for a while. In fact, the last time the Rake was culturally relevant was with the release of the movie in 2018, and we will talk about that movie later on. Even with the apparent absence of the Rake, it still somehow is the most terrifying creature to come from the internet. Maybe that's because it was a creature created by the internet for the internet. It was essentially created in a lab, well, a forum. The origin of the Rake is easier to follow than many of the other online horror creations. It all started on 4chan. In 2005, a group of Anons on 4chan were trying to create a new monster. The board started with the title, "Hey B, let's make a new monster." Many ideas were shared, but one creature really stood out. It was tall, had 3 eyes, gray skin, and rows of sharp teeth. Eventually, a group that liked this creature took it to another thread. The creature would morph from there. The creature now had 2 eyes, but kept the gray skin and emaciated look. It was humanoid but had no ears, mouth, or nose. Of course, it did have a mouth, but you couldn't see that mouth unless it was opened. Once it opened, rows of many dull and tiny teeth were seen. The mouth kind of opened on a hinge, so more downward. This was the further description of the Rake. The creature was 6 feet tall, but almost always seen on all fours. It was known to be seen around suburban areas and forested locations later on. If you saw the Rake, it would have already seen you. It was known for watching people, and usually that was all it did. It only attacked if it was provoked. The creature would just stare at people from a distance, more curious and creepy than deadly. With that description, the Rake was officially created, though the name of the creature would come later. It was being called the Crawler, which was the name of the thread that was creating it. The actual name, the Rake, wouldn't come until the first creepypasta story was written about it. The story of the Rake would be further established through that first creepypasta. Starting with the history of the creature, sightings were established and placed as early as the 12th century. The creature also has been sighted on as many as 4 continents. The first Rake creepypasta comes from a familiar place, the Something Awful forums. It was posted on a blog titled Horror Theater, and this is the earliest record of the story. It was posted not long after the Rake had emerged from the depths of 4chan. The story is told through sightings with the Rake. The first sighting was in 1691 by a mariner. In his log he wrote, "He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt the sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake." This is the earliest sighting of the creature and seems to paint the picture that the Rake is somehow communicating with this mariner. It could also mean that this encounter scared him so bad that he never wanted to return to that place. The location isn't specified, and we can only surmise that it was outside of England. In 1880 we got another sighting. This one is translated from Spanish, but a name isn't given, and once again a location is missing. "I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand, I will not sleep. His voice. And the rest of the text is unintelligible. Again, it appears that the Rake is able to communicate with people. It isn't stated how or why. The Rake appears to be a sentient being. The rest of the text also seems to trail off before becoming unintelligible. The hands of the creature were described as wet. This person was able to touch the Rake and didn't die, which is something that you wouldn't expect of such a creature. The next sighting comes from someone's final note from 1964. It is written, "As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and I felt his presence. And once I woke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice, and I looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye." Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. "Dearest Lenny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name." The Rake seems to be an almost mythical creature whose motives are not known. It has driven this person to the brink, from which they can never return. It has spoken to them, maybe in dreams, and stated that it was going after another. The Rake is also displaying a pattern from each story. It appears to them while they sleep and stares at them. It then haunts their dreams, and they fear that when they awake next, he'll reappear. The Rake is instilling a fear in these people that is beyond human comprehension. The fear they feel is beyond what they can take. The Rake always seems to appear in the dark of night and waits for them to open their eyes. A final witness testimony comes from 2006. A woman is awoken by the sound of her husband leaving the bedroom to go to the bathroom. She takes this moment to pull back some of the covers. Only then does she realize that her husband is still there. Now awoken, her husband turned to her and then pulled himself up quickly. So quickly he almost knocked her out of bed. He pulled her close, and that was when she saw it. At the foot of the bed appeared to be a large naked man or hairless dog. It was sitting on the bed, facing away from the couple. The creature sat motionless for a moment before it got up quickly and shuffled to the husband's side of the bed. It stared into his eyes, 2 giant black voids staring. The creature then touched the husband's knee before fleeing out of the room and towards the children's rooms. Both instantly jumped up and scrambled for the lights. When they walked into the hall, they saw the creature crouching and covered in blood. The couple's daughter laid on the floor clutching at her bloody shirt. As the 2 ran to their daughter's aid, the creature ran from the home. As they sat down to help their daughter, she said a very strange thing. "He is the Rake." The woman's husband took their daughter to the car as she called the police. That night, the man ran off the road and into the lake. Neither he nor his daughter survived. The woman collected her son and left the house to stay in a hotel near family until the house could be inspected by police. Several months later, and the woman decided she would need to look into the creature, the Rake, herself. She found someone local who had also experienced the creature. They soon began to collect the logs from sightings over the years, which were the ones we discussed earlier. She began to use a recorded device as she sleeps, because she knew the Rake would eventually come back for her and her son. While listening back to one of her recordings, she heard a shrill voice. She recognized it as the Rake, and that's when the memory of that night seemed to shift. When the creature had gone over to her husband and stared at him, it appeared to have been saying something to him. What it said, she does not know. Listening to the shrill voice gave her unprecedented levels of anxiety. She couldn't listen for long. The woman says that she has not seen the Rake once since that night. She does fear the night when she'll wake up and see it silently staring directly at her. This story spread so quickly from the original forums. It was being spread on LiveJournal, Reddit, YouTube comment sections, and eventually the creepypasta websites. The spread of this story isn't so uncommon with other internet horror. Many different creations have spread through word of mouth, so to speak, online. Many people would chime in asking for the original story's origin. During that time, the original post had been lost. The copypasta was spreading from site to site. Many thought it was an actual cryptid story. This confusion can be seen across multiple websites and forums. There was something different about the Rake, though. It was being spread as if it were a real-world cryptid. Subreddits like r/Humanoid, a subreddit dedicated to cryptid sightings, have posts discussing the Rake. The most popular is from a hunter claiming to have seen something tall and gray in the woods. Though the name of the rake is never directly stated in this post, the similarities are there. The creature makes very strange noises as it howls, something not normally associated with the rake. Another post discusses a creature that another person saw while hiking in the deep woods. They have heard of the rake story but didn't believe it until it stood in front of them. A 6-foot-tall naked creature with grayish-white skin and long arms ran through this section of the woods, fully illuminated by the headlights, giving me at least 15 seconds of uninterrupted visual contact, with the creature firmly imprinting it into my mind. I've been tormented by this creature since. It makes me confused, sad, curious. I can't get the image out of my head. I can't forget the feelings this creature gave me while I lived there, playing and toying with my head, in waking life and in my dreams. The description given sounds similar to a few creatures, but he explicitly calls it the rake here. The rake is even able to get into his head and haunt his nightmares. Every day is torment due to this creature, and this sounds very familiar to that first rake story. Another user talks about their frightful encounter with the creature. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the feeling of something watching me. I felt extremely uneasy. I rolled over to look around the room, and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall but looked as if it had a broken back and couldn't stand up completely. I was horrified. I rolled over and covered myself up head to toe with the cover. I refused to move or look out the rest of the night, even though I was fully awake. Once again, the rake sighting takes place at night while the person sleeps. This keeps in line with the rest of the lore developed so far. The rake's description is pretty consistent across all stories. This has helped to establish a firm image in the mind of the internet. You can find many different stories across the internet. Staying on Reddit, you could look at the No Sleep subreddit, which is known for posting horror stories. This subreddit is where many creepypastas have originated, but also a place where hundreds of rake stories have also been posted. People wanted to know who was the rake. They were enamored with its visual horror and its mystery. It blended a kind of body horror with that of a cryptic doombringer. The creature had many similarities to other cryptids even. The visual inspiration is reminiscent of the gray-bodied aliens. Large eyes, no mouth or ears. It could have been an extraterrestrial being. That wasn't the only similarity, though. It also had connections to the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a gaunt but tall creature from Native American folklore. It has become incredibly popular on the internet. The creature stands tall but mostly travels on all fours, but it's still humanoid. Finally, the creature has claws and fangs similar to the rake. There are quite a few differences in these two beings as well. The rake isn't explicitly stated to eat human flesh, which is a huge part of the Wendigo lore. It also mostly appears to watch its victims and not actively hunt them. Another cryptid I want to mention is the Mothman. While not quite visually similar, save for the large eyes, these two have something else in common. The Mothman was said to appear before great tragedy and then disappear after. The rake doesn't do quite that, but he appears to serve a purpose beyond just wanting to kill his prey. He seems to have a motive, but it's something we will never understand. The final cryptid I think really helped with the changing lore of the rake was the crawlers. Crawlers are a cryptid located in the forests of the US and Canada. They are described as pale gray humanoids that walk on all fours. They already have a few things in common with the rake, specifically the way they look. They do have some stark differences too, though. Firstly, their mouths don't open on a hinge, which was a big part of the rake's design. The creatures are located in the woods, which makes sense, but contrasts the rake again. Finally, crawlers are said to be extremely aggressive, while the rake likes to toy with its victims. As the creepypasta spread, the lore of the rake would change a bit at a time. The rake would take on more characteristics of other similar humanoid cryptids. It eventually would be a creature that craved human flesh and was adept at getting it. He would move from mainly stalking those in suburban areas to woodsy areas. The creature could be seen moving quickly through the trees of heavily wooded areas. This was likely an adaptation taken from one of the many pieces of artwork pertaining to the creature and the other similar cryptid sightings. The rake would appear to have something that most other online entities didn't have. He had sightings. The first sighting of the rake, and probably the most culturally relevant, was the Berwick sighting. This image is probably one that you've seen countless times around the internet. This is the Berwick sighting image, and it would become the most prevalent footage of the rake. It is pretty much what most people think of when they think of the rake. This image was even shared on mainstream media, no doubt helping the spread. There are multiple videos online that claim to be sightings of the Rake. Most are shaky cam footage that shows a gray humanoid in a dark setting. There were so many that this internet urban legend was gaining more and more relevance. Soon it could be even seen as a worldly urban legend, not confined by the walls of the internet. The Rake is a monumental victory in the world of internet horror. A creature was created that was so disturbing but real that it was eventually picked up by those outside of the community. This is important as it would start to have a strong position in the world of internet pop culture. The Rake would undergo a few changes when it appeared in one of the internet's more popular ARGs, Everyman Hybrid. What started as a workout YouTube channel with the Slenderman gimmick turned into a strange and interesting tale of a missing girl and two monstrous stalkers. The relevance here is for the Rake. Even though the ARG mainly focused on Slender, the Rake was a very big character for the story. His first appearance was in an episode titled Cops Checked, No Body. I'll play that footage now.
You gotta go see what this is.
Dude? This is beyond
She could be sleeping, she could be hurt. You just go. This is all you.
Hello? She got cuts on her arm, dude.
She could be hurt.
She got cuts on her arm.
It's our duty, we have to do it. Go poke her with a stick or something. Isn't that what you're supposed to do with bodies to check if they're alive? Ma'am, you shouldn't be sleeping here. This isn't really conducive. Jeff, don't give me that look. Just go. She's got something in her hand. Ma'am, are you okay?
Let's just go.
Just, there's something in her hand. Get it. She's got cuts on her arm.
Sorry.
Holy shit. What is that?
This is the first sighting of the Rake in the series, and it does something that changes the lore immediately. Firstly, it killed this girl and left her body in the woods. The Rake was mainly known for appearing in suburban settings, not in the woods. The girl was clearly slashed and purposefully left for them to find. The Rake was sending a message. The Rake in the series proceeds to stalk one of the members of the channel and even live in the crawlspace of his house and the shed in his backyard. The Rake mostly just watches the members, but he does eventually attack. He leaves large slash marks on one of the members' arms when they find him in the shed. The Rake does kill again in this series, killing off two characters. The Rake also communicates with the group. It states that it has made a deal with the Slenderman and can no longer attack them. This doesn't quite pan out as a member tries to fight the Rake, claiming to have cut its head off. Of course it lives and disembowels him. This would be the last time the Rake was mentioned in the series. The Rake was one of the more popular internet urban legends, and yet it didn't get as many fan games as many of the others. There was a game called The Rake that was on Steam. It was an early access game that is kind of dead now. The game has you hunting the Rake in a forest. You are given tracking equipment, a cage, and a few guns. The game is mostly just the dark atmosphere of the forest, but also mixes in some decent sound design. The way the music works feels a little like Slender, the 8 pages, where it progressively gets creepier the more you play. The Rake will stalk the player like in the story, but it is clearly out for blood. You will need to track it down before it tracks you. This all sounds pretty bland, but there is a multiplayer component that was fun but doesn't save the game. This is what the Rake looks like in the game. It travels on 2 legs, has long appendages, and a big head. It looks more like an alien than the Rake from the creepypasta. This wasn't exactly the best game to show off one of the internet's creepiest urban legends. There were a few other attempts, but none really had the impact that other creepypasta games have had. The Rake is a creature that is perfect for a game format, but one hasn't been perfect for it yet. The Rake would see another attempt at a mainstream formula. The Rake received a movie in 2018. It was critically panned for being a not very interesting movie, and I actually had to go watch it for myself. The movie opens up with a family at Christmas. The dad appears to be some sort of criminal psychologist, or at least has some connection to a dangerous serial killer. The serial killer is claiming to be infected by something calling itself the Rake. The Rake is the one making him commit the atrocities, he says on tape. Honestly, the only cool part about this whole scene is all the callbacks to the Rake from the creepypasta. You can see tons of pictures, drawings, and images all over the dad's desk. This will be my only praise for the movie, as it doesn't get better from here. The serial killer, it turns out, has escaped and is watching the family. He eventually breaks in and kills the parents before taking himself out. He talks about the Rake before doing it. This traumatizes the kids and also passes on the Rake's essence or sickness. We are seeing a massive change from what the Rake started as. The creature now has proxies similar to Slender Man and makes his victims carve out their own eyes in a way that looks very much like a Zalgo image. It feels like the writers liked the creature enough to make a movie out of him, but turned it into a mashup of different creepypastas. The Rake was shown to have some influence over people, but that was mostly because of how terrifying he was. He could control people, but that was never really shown. The movie turns into the Rake killing all of the kids' friends now as adults. Eventually it leads to the brother killing his sister by accident from seeing a vision of the Rake, then killing himself to try and stop the spread, but this only leads to the Rake manifesting itself through his body in an interesting sign of body horror. The Rake then touches the head of the last survivor before the movie ends. This movie feels like wasted potential as the Rake is the perfect slow burn horror character. They could have included the historical portions of the character too, but they didn't. The only good part was the early scene with the Rake imagery and the design of the creature itself being pretty intimidating, but not lore accurate. The Rake of course would receive much better lore accuracy in the plethora of short films created for the creature. They do change the formula up a bit between each story. Some of them lean heavily into the Rake as a stalker and home invader, while other stories have it as a murderous creature found in the woods. A lot of the short films use the found footage style, which worked for many of the ARGs of the time. This style works well for the Rake and definitely adds some suspense to the story. The appearance of the Rake varies in each of these short films, though most do keep the long claw, pale gray skin, and humanoid look. The Rake never really gives a reason for doing what it does, which makes it perfect for a short film. The Rake has been a very influential creepypasta. Not only did it inspire a lot of similar cryptids that would appear in their creepypasta stories, it actually inspired the creation of Slender Man. The creator of Slender actually said that he wanted his creation to have a very similar feeling to that of the Rake. The Rake is one of the oldest internet horror creations. It is the one that will likely last the test of time. As other internet horror stories lose their identity to the fandom, the Rake doesn't seem to have that problem. He stands, or crouches, as one of the scariest creations to come from the mind of the internet. Thanks everyone for watching another deep dive into the lore of the internet. The Rake is one of my favorite stories and I just don't ever see that changing. I want to thank my Patreon supporters, Blow-A-Nose and Nora Kingsley. Thank you to everyone who watches my videos and supports my content. I hope to catch you all in the next one. Have a good night.